Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Signals Understanding the Coronavirus Crisis, the new one that we are offering today. Just as a quick reminder, your microphones are muted by default. If you have any question, please feel free to type them in the question dialog box that we have for that purpose. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We're very glad to have you with us again for this third edition of our Signals webinar. As usual, today we will be sharing with you fresh data from the work that we do all around the world. We'll also have a live local perspective, this time from Singapore. And we will be sharing learnings from the work that we're doing with you and as we learn to navigate this unprecedented situation together. So specifically today on the agenda, we have Simon, who will again update us on the story so far, taking us one step further, and how people around the world are being impacted by this crisis. Catherine will give us her perspective, as I was saying, talking from Singapore. After that, Benoit, who leads our brand tracking globally, will talk about what is important for brands nowadays and what they need to be thinking about if they want to carry on growing. And finally, Alison will present what we're learning about retail and what we should start thinking about today to prepare what is coming tomorrow. And with this, I will pass on the floor to Simon.
Thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everybody. It's great to be with you today. What I want to do is really take a look at the current climate of public opinion around the world and really try to think about where people's heads are, if you like, after many weeks or indeed some months. I'll share quickly details of where you can access more information. And then we'll spend a moment just looking at where we may be heading and perhaps trying to establish some of the learnings we've got from the different phases so far. And Benoit and Alison will pick up on that. And it's great to have Catherine with us to help us really take stock and think through perhaps some of the stories so far as we go through this process and learn from around the world. So in terms of where we are today, I wanted to kick off with a study that we've been running every month around the world. It's called What Worries the World, and we ask people, what are the issues that affect you in your country? And the real benefit in normal times comes from the fact that we have a standard questionnaire. These are not normal times, and so of course we have to add coronavirus to the questionnaire. What happens? We end up with it steaming to the front of the queue. 61% of people are picking it out as one of the big issues facing their country from a list of 18, by the way. It's the biggest single score since we started the survey. It's the top issue in 24 of 28 countries. So, you know, in no doubt, it's coronavirus, which people around the world are worrying about. We've been tracking it through this survey now for just over 2 months now. And when we started, we were looking at questions like, is this all exaggerated by the media? Or will it all be over by June? And again, I guess it won't surprise you to learn that things have moved on. Now we're asking questions, for example, about how long will it take for the recovery? And as you see on the left-hand side, many countries, France, Japan, Russia, it's going to take quite some time for the recovery. Others, perhaps a little bit more optimistic, Vietnam, China, and India, and US and Brazil are divided at this stage. But the overall mood is of gloom. Our consumer confidence is at its lowest level for many, many years. And I think, you know, people are very alive to what it means for them personally, as well as their country. I also wanted just to pause and look a bit at face masks. I think because they're part of our story today, if you like, and they're likely to be part of the story tomorrow. And I've highlighted one question in particular, where we've asked people what they think of the proposition that people should wear face masks in public, even when the pandemic is over, so that we can protect others. 3 countries, 3 very different results: UK, Italy, China. And for me, it's just a reminder as researchers of how we'll need to be quite careful and nuanced as we look particularly to understand different countries and perhaps to make comparisons, because there may be cultural differences that we can draw on here. They may be the country's respective recent experiences, but there may also be government advice and government regulations. So for me, it just reminded us in one question about face masks, some of the complexity we're going to have as we start to try to understand, let's say, one market or many markets. So keep in touch with the work that we're doing. Clearly, there's a body of evidence developing. Your Ipsos partners will guide you and help you think through what's most relevant to your own organisation. So I just wanted to mention that we do have a website where we try to bring everything together, the latest research that I'm sharing today, expert analysis that Benoit and Alison will pick up on, and also every couple of weeks we try to bring together what we've been learning around the world in a digest called Signals, and that's launched later today, which hopefully is a good wrapper and a good pointer to some of the things going on. But to get onto this point about where we may be heading, I think we're all probably clear now we need to be very careful about making predictions, but I think we can start to say some things perhaps about the dynamics of what's been happening and what this might mean. And to start with, I wanted to look at perhaps at the emotional side of things, if you like, as witnessed in the lockdown experience. So in the UK, for example, today is the first month is over of lockdown, and we're finding people are finding it increasingly hard to stay entertained, to keep in touch with family and friends, even to be able to go to work or to do our work. And those are visualized in some video diaries that the team has collected if you want to perhaps see some vox pops on that front. But certainly week by week, things are getting tougher in many aspects as people go through the process. Second example is from Spain, and we talked about this in a previous webinar, but I think the big thing we take from this, if we compare the first reading where we are asking people to self-assess, how do they feel today? 19th of March, most people said they're in this adjustment phase. Today, actually different people at different phases, perhaps with different, let's say, balance sheet of feelings, if you like. And I think it's fair to say that it's getting harder and harder perhaps to capture people and say this country is in this box or people are in that box. Third one is around the United States, but still on this question of how do we feel. Let's look at these things that are normal parts of normal life in the US, traveling around, meeting your friends and family, going to the grocery store, even doing your job. At the moment, people are saying this is a risk to do these normal things. And it raises the question, of course, over the coming weeks in many countries, we may see some relaxation in the rules and the regulations, but it still raises the question about how quickly we're going to feel comfortable going out back, if you like, into our normal lives, how we behave, and indeed how we buy things. And Alison will pick up on that later on. As I mentioned, we're able to start to look at some of the dynamics and some of the things that are going on. And one of the things we've been trying to track are some of the early behaviors that we're seeing. In the last webinar, we looked at China, and we were discussing in particular perhaps what might be the medium-term consequences of the growth of baking while people are at home, or changes to the healthcare category and people's aspirations in the wake of the lockdown. Within the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot more data now coming through about media consumption. TV viewing is on the up. And this paper from the US, particularly interesting because we're starting to see perhaps a change in how we view TV, from me and what I want to watch to how we may watch it together. Again, questions about what that means for the medium term, but certainly these are the kind of things that we're trying to track and to flag. And Benoit will talk about some of these issues about how brands are responding in a moment. And then finally, just in terms of this quick review, one of the things I think as researchers we're often perhaps looking to do is to make things quite rational and to identify different stages. And I think one of the things we're already starting to see is that we need to be careful about assuming that this is perhaps a linear process that we can track in one direction. And the example from our team in Lebanon is very interesting here because they've been tracking online conversations. This is the volume of conversations over time. You'll see some peaks, for example, in line with the first deaths and in line with the government declaring a medical emergency. You'll see some phases that the team has started to identify. But on this slide, I think what was particularly clear, if you look at the left-hand side, what we're finding as we go into this, let's say this latest phase, is a return to some of the topics that were first being talked about some weeks ago around the spread of the crisis, or spread of the cases, I should say, and around the socio-economic impact. And for me, it's a marker that we need to be a little bit careful about assuming this is something which is going to follow a logical order. I think we're almost certainly in this for the long haul, and I think that put that into focus. And that brings us on very much to Singapore, and we're delighted that Catherine's able to join us today. She's our country manager in Singapore. Catherine, hello, how are you feeling today? It's early evening, if I'm right.
Yeah, it's early evening. It's a sunny day in Singapore, like every day we are having whole year summer right here.
Okay,
good morning, everyone.
Hello. It's great to talk to you. I mean, I think one of the things that this week we're seeing is you seem to have identified there's a new phase for Singapore this week. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the current situation, because I think it's been changing almost by the day.
Sure. Well, if I can describe the whole situation with one word, it is fluid. Well, to what extent? Simon, your question is about one new phase, but for someone literally sitting here and experiencing the whole journey from day one, I felt like we've been through quite a few phases. Everything moved very fast. From the beginning, we have 1 to 2 cases per day. And at the moment, we had 20 cases per day in February. That's where we got concerned, and we started partially working from home. Then for a while, we see things seems in control. We were planning getting back to office full force, and quickly we had a second wave hit with local community spread, followed by the lockdown and the spike of cases from 3-digit to 4-digit, school closed. And 2 days ago, we were just announced extension of lockdown for 1 more month. So that's pretty scary if you look at the numbers, especially considering Singapore is a small country with only 5 million population. So the ratio per million population is already highest in Asia. But I have to say the death rate in Singapore is also one of the lowest one across the globe, which is only less than 0.1%. And more importantly, I would say Singapore government is one has high respect among its people. And indeed, it's quite many support to help the economy and protect people's livelihood. For example, the salary subsidy and cash payout. This is a clear hit for our economy, being a hub country highly exposed to entire globe. Yeah. So we've seen the economy shrink quite a bit in Q1, the lowest in the past 10 years. But we also see people are getting much more resilient. We've been passing through the initial shocking stage, and everybody getting more organized, calmer, and also positive, I would say, in general.
Yeah. So we've got this, if you like, this shock, this fluidity, questions about the economy, and if you like, in the medium and longer term. What about what are you noticing about what Singapore's are doing and how life's changed, and perhaps, if you like, consumer behaviour in the country these days?
Of course, it's a very big influencer for everyone's daily life. We've been seeing the panic buying not different from many other countries, food, drinks, even toilet paper. The funny thing for Singapore, where we see they really love bubble tea. Right after the Prime Minister announced the extended lockdown and bubble tea stores will be closed, people just literally go there queuing for hours. That's just the joking aside. We do see the digital transactions getting much obviously more popular and important. That's a clear shift for consumers' behavior. So I was reading a report this morning. There was 100,000 people tried online payment for the very first time during this crisis, according to one of the local bank. So online shopping is getting much more important for Singaporean because everybody just scared of visiting the supermarket. And there's a lot of complaints on the online grocery shops because there's no available slot. People need to wait. And the most valuable information on the mommy's WhatsApp group is like, oh my God, they just released some delivery slot. Go and get it. Very precious information.
Yeah. So again, I guess one of the features there is people. I think you mentioned people being scared to go out or uncomfortable about going out. Well, how about you? I mean, you're in your home today. How's it affected you personally as a resident of the country?
Well, it's kind of tough because if you look at my background, it's literally my bedroom because my study room has been taken up by my partner also running a conference call. And we have to literally switch between roles for me being a wife, being a mother, being a boss of my helper, and a daughter my mom lives together with me. So that's a tough part. Of course, we have the highlight of the life. My boy just had his first virtual birthday party, and his friends just dialed in, singing birthday songs, blow the cake, and blow the candle and cake cutting. So it's very cute, and it's very fun.
Yeah.
For me, it's a complicated feeling because I'm originally from China. So on the same day when we see Wuhan lift up the lockdown, being the last city in China, it is literally the day Singapore entered the lockdown. So in one way, I'm really happy for my relatives, family, friends, colleagues in China. They've been through the most difficult part along the journey and safe and healthy. But on the other side, I feel a bit blue for Singapore. So in the most recent office virtual town hall, I presented a picture showing a bright red kite flying through a gloomy storm, bravely to encourage everybody just stay strong. We will get through this together. But it's tough, but we will be stronger and more united at the end.
Yeah. So as one, yes, I see. So it's almost like as one more optimistic chapter commenced in Wuhan, we've got another slightly more questionable chapter emerging in Singapore. Yeah, a real contrast. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Catherine. I'm going to hand back to Jennifer in Milan, but really great to talk to you, and thanks for sharing your experiences.
From Milan confinement to Singapore confinement. Catherine, it was really great to listen to your personal experience. And I was wondering if you had to say what surprised you most through these last weeks that you've been living. What would be the one thing that surprised you most?
Well, I would say how much we all miss a real human interaction. If you record in the beginning of the working from home stage, most people would be a bit shy from the camera, and I always had to convince or remind them to turn on the video for the call. But gradually, I noticed more and more them fall in love with video calls. We just want to stay connected, even virtually. And we have run virtual drinking session with the team, and we plan to run another family session to get kids to say hello to each other. And if you remember, while we were waiting for a meeting to start in a boardroom, everybody just looking at their phone, staring at the screen. And now I have many confessions days from colleagues say, Catherine, if we go back to the office one day while waiting for the meeting to start, we will never do that. We will just put aside the phone and chit chat. This is probably going to be the very precious learning we get from the whole thing. And for me, it's definitely a good one.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I guess we're all very grateful to technology, but we're all looking forward to a good hug and a good chat face to face. Benoit, would you like to step in? And thank you so much, Catherine, and tell us about brands.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to share our views on brand building during these very special times. I think first, no one can really say what will look like the new normal, as we call it, and how much time it will take to have a stabilization of the behaviors and the attitudes towards the brands. But what we know is usually crisis times always accelerate some trends. And what I would like to propose now is to share or revisit some of the strongest assumptions we have on brand building based on our experience in Ipsos. I think an important start point is to say that now more than ever, context is really critical. The current changes we all experience impact the way we live, the way we work, the way we interact with the families and friends, and are likely to shape how brands are and will be perceived, chosen, and used. We already have a lot of examples of brands from different industries that are responding to these new contexts. And we have two illustrations here on the right I really like. So first is from Audi, who played with the logo to deliver the message that we need to keep distance and stay together. There is also this Nike message about playing inside and of course at home, and it will be the benefit for everyone, for the world. So I think that the important message here is that the brands can really craft the context and intervene in the life of the consumer. So what the brand should be doing in the future, near future? First, the brand needs to build an emotional closeness with the consumer. So we know that to build a strong brand, you always need both functional superiority and emotional relationship. And when we see our database in Ipsos, and we have a database coming from 30,000 equity studies across 130 markets, so, and from any categories and sectors, what we see is the brand performance, that is the rational dimension of the brands, always been stable across times. So it's kind of an entry cost for the brands. But closeness, that is capturing the emotional relationship with the brands, grew gradually. And when we see the last figures from 2020, and of course we have seen on March as well, closeness is still growing. So that's a very interesting trend that we feel that still very important to consider in these times. Here we have a great example. I really like this example of Guinness. We don't have time to see the ad, but of course I encourage you to see it. You will have the links behind the presentation. So Guinness, the St. Patrick's Day is a critical moment for these brand, and they created a great ad encouraging people to celebrate safely at home. And the way it's done is really creating a lot of empathy. And I would say that they are more touching the soul of the citizen than just the consumer mind. So that's a great example of emotional connection. Second, brands need to stay salient by creating new memory associations. I think every one of you have read papers about brands that want to go dark during this time and so on. And my colleague, Sean Dix from Creative Excellence, already demonstrated 2 weeks ago how it's important to continue to communicate for the brands. Here we have different figures showing the direct link between the share of voice, so communication, and share of markets, also the share of markets with the equity. So we can all agree here, I think, in the room, that brands should not go dark in the time of crisis. But that doesn't mean that the brands should simply carry on as before either. And our message is that we feel brands must review the way they generate salience, from attention salience, that is about quantity of communication, saturating the mind of the consumer, not missing any moment of consumptions, to memory salience, that is very different, that is creating new associations, positive associations in the mind of the consumer, creating a richer network of interconnected memories. We feel that brands should shut down automated marketing now and really create new pieces of work, like the example we have here on that slide. That is a great piece of work. I really like it, honestly. And it's done by Dove in Canada. It's a campaign that is called Courage is Beautiful, and it shows some different faces damaged by the mask of the new daily heroes, the ones that are on the first line, as we call it, the doctors, the nurses. It's a very emotional campaign, very relevant for Dove, of course, with the skin, and it's a great piece of work. So I really encourage you to have a look on that as well. Third, brands need to revisit market effects to maximize choice. So what we see is that to have a real purchase of the products and services, it's not enough to have a strong equity for the brands. You really need to activate some levers on the marketing, and that's what is showing our database as well. So, and the three biggest levers in marketing are accessibility, product range, and price. And you see the figures 2019, 2020, more or less the same. Accessibility the first, second product range, and third price. But if we have a look on the previous data from 29 after the crisis, we have seen the price sensibility being much more higher. So we expect that price sensibility will go higher in the following weeks and months. Second thing is that we feel accessibility and product range must to really be reinvented. And so we had Catherine saying that e-commerce really changing a lot of behaviors, and I think in Singapore, I think it's everywhere. So we need to revisit that thanks to the new channels and also the new trends, like for instance, recycling, packaging, and so on. So it's really a call to revisit all these levers. It's not only for FMCG brands. We have an example here from Nedbank, that is a bank in South Africa. What they created is a new function in their mobile banking application, and these functions allows the customers to order groceries and have it delivered to the elderly relatives that are not able anymore to shop for themselves. So that's a great example of activating the brands on these market effects dimensions. Last but not least, brands need to fit with the new paradigm, global, local. We'll see in the future if the pandemic phenomenon will amplify the growing concern against globalization or not. But what we see is this new balance between global and local. And in Ipsos, we call it the new paradigm, low-ball. Low for local first, ball, global second. So it's the opposite that the famous global concept. And we see that in many studies. We have just one example here from our Ipsos Global Trends survey covering 30 countries, that only 40% or less than 40% people agree that global brands are now making better products than local ones. So it means that the majority of the consumers really feel that local brands are very strong and better than global brands. So when you are managing your global brands, you really need to think about how activating your brands, taking account the local culture, the local realities. So that was 4 messages we wanted to say this morning. One, really focusing on a stronger emotional engagement with the consumers. Second, building these mental associations. Third, thinking about revisiting the market effects. And fourth, acting more locally than just globally. Of course, if you want to know more, we have this point of view you can have access to, and of course, we are available for more if you want.
Thanks so much, Benoit. We could hear your passion for brand building in those words. It's very, very good to hear, and very good examples as well. So thanks for sharing those. One question I have for you is, you mentioned the past crisis, so you showed us a few numbers there on, to help us think of what effects we may be seeing. And I think you were around those times already in market research. And so my question for you would be, from your observation, do all brands have the same sort of chance to succeed after a crisis like this?
Yeah, I think first, probably across all categories, we always see brands that can really succeed in any time. But thinking about the recovery phase and the last crisis we had, I would say there are some brands that are, let's say, more lucky than others, and the ones that are tapping in the nostalgia phenomenon. And we know that consumers, when they are in crisis times, and I think it should take some time, they have these feelings about the past, the happy days they had in the past, childhood as well. So all these brands that are having these connections emotionally are probably more lucky than others. And probably also thinking about the brands that can emerge in the crisis times, probably they also have more chance to succeed. And if we think today about, for instance, some digital brands, Zoom, for instance, these kind of brands probably will succeed more in the near future compared to some others.
So roots in the past and building the future are a bit the two areas. That
more or less, yes. Yeah.
For a quick answer. Okay. Thanks so much, Benoit. And now I would pass the microphone over to Alison to tell us about our new retail experiences and what brands should be thinking about nowadays and for the coming weeks and months.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. For our closing part today, I'm going to talk about how brands can start to get ready and getting ready to close the sale on the new retail landscape. So let's start with the simple fact, and it's a very simple one that I think we can all relate to in our personal lives, that this pandemic has changed everything about shopping. We have new values. We care about safety first, and economy and simplicity, and being cozy with our families. We worry about supply for the first time in many of our lives, and really the first time since World War II. We're learning how to shop in a socially distant world. We're using technology in new ways. We're planning ahead further. We're hoarding, all of these things that were never or haven't been in our lives. We also are operating in a context that we just don't understand. You know, Benoit talked about context a couple minutes ago, and the pandemic and fear have changed the context of so many things, but especially price. We're worried about people we know that are sick. We want to treat ourselves at home. We're willing to pay for convenience, but we're afraid of a recession to come. That creates a very strange set of parameters around our view of price. And of course, this is the absolute tipping point for e-commerce. Not just countries, but categories are continuing to skyrocket in the way we're using technology to shop. So what do we do? And I love this example of everybody just waiting. It's really easy to use the pandemic as an excuse to wait and to say we're going to wait till stores are open again. We're going to wait till we don't have to be in line. We're going to wait until we can actually stand close to the person in front of us, or maybe not have a line. But we can't. We have to get ahead of this curve and use this time of waiting to really reinvent for the new reality. Let's talk about some of these changes, and the word unimaginable is really the one that sticks in my head. 3 months ago, I never would have imagined the things we do on a daily basis, and quite frankly, the things we don't do. So it's up to all of us to start learning and understanding what are the realities, not just from our world, but from the world of our consumers, that are going to stick. So here's a couple from my personal world that I think are going to stick. First, shifting to even having fresh food delivered regularly. Even those of us that have been big time e-commerce shoppers have stayed away for the most part from getting our fruits and our vegetables and our milk delivered the way we do our more routine and shelf stable items. That's changed radically in the last 3 months around the world. And it's not just young people. You know, will old people ever go back into stores again unless absolutely necessary? They've gotten used to having their prescriptions delivered the way they were 50 years ago. They've gotten used to having their groceries delivered. We care for 3 octogenarians in our family, and our parents are all living separately, and we order all their food for them, and they've gotten quite used to it. I think that's going to stick in a way that we never would have imagined of our senior citizens becoming our biggest e-commerce shoppers. On the right is an example of a physical store. And if you can't notice 2 things about this that are really different, I want to point them out. The first are the arrows in the floor, and that's one-way traffic. And many stores are experimenting with traffic flow and obviously holding people outside, but forcing us down aisles and telling us how to shop so we can be safe some of that is going to stick by law in many countries for a couple of years. So we've got to get used to that. And as marketers, what does that mean? That means we need to think about our products coming from certain angles. We need to operate in less space because more room needs to be allocated to keeping people 2 meters apart. And that's a very different world for the retail universe. The other is the store is clean. And I don't mean clean in the sense of the floor is shiny or they're using antibacterial materials. I mean, they've removed displays. Walk your stores, see how much less shopper marketing material is in the store right now. I think you're going to see us go to a clean store environment that's going to reduce the opportunities for brands to really shine in ways that we've become accustomed to. And we're going to have to find new and different ways to grab shoppers' attention. So let's talk about a few themes that cross categories. The first is experimentation. There is nothing like a pandemic to drive creativity in our business world, in our personal world. And people are taking risks and doing things very differently. And we as business people need to learn from our consumers. So this is an example from a US study that was just done last week. 40% of US shoppers like the way they're new shopping and want to continue that routine. So it's maybe we shifted our behaviors out of absolute physical and legal and safety necessity, but many of those behaviors are going to stick. What we have to do as business people is figure out which ones. So here's 2 facts from the US. 10% of the US population is using restaurant delivery and pickup for the first time. That number may not seem huge, but it's enough to make or break the profitability of every retail store in this country. So how do we change that? 9% on groceries being delivered for the first time. That's a huge level of experimentation and trial that even if half of them stick, it's a game changer in the way people shop. So we're starting to track behavior in shopping across a range of key categories, across an awful lot of countries. And I want to talk to a few of those, and I'm just going to pick China and Spain and Mexico as 3 examples because they're very different places in the COVID-19 curve, with obviously China, we hope, coming out of this, and Mexico just at the beginning. So as we think about the data tells us that in China, brick and mortar is the minority, and this is in beauty care. So across beauty, brick and mortar is the minority of trips and the minority of incidents right now for beauty. That's a tipping point that we've absolutely crossed. China was further developed before, but these numbers are up significantly versus where they were just 6 months ago. The countries further to the right are following suit, and we expect them to continue to skyrocket. And what does this mean in beauty care? Well, think about beauty. Right? The picture that's not on this page is the picture of the wonderful beauty assistant helping me in a high touch way, picking out everything for me. Instead, we go to a traditional retail store, it's lower touch. Even more so, we go online, it's 0 touch. It's safer, but I'm not going to try. Will I ever try cosmetics again in store? Don't know, but we have to get ready to understand what are safer ways, what are more comfortable ways for people to experiment in the new environment and get ready for low touch everything. Tech is another example. This is a category or series of categories, consumer electronics, where customer assistance is critical, particularly to trade people up and bring in new users to different segments of the business. So the same data, China, roughly half the business is split between either pure e-commerce or click and collect. You see in Spain, it's getting real close to where China is, and Mexico is suddenly taking off. So the role of customer assistance as we go from fully staffed physical stores right now to either almost no staffed and no people physical stores, or as you see on the right in our virtual example here, going online, we have to find new and different ways to do that to delight shoppers. Another one that's impossible to predict. What happens to on-premise? What happens to our restaurants and our pubs? Will we go back? And will we ever go back with such love of our social engagement? It certainly will be a while and it will be regulated. Here's what I found. But longer term, we'll be thinking about, will people jump into their pubs because they long for social engagement? Or will they be more likely to stick with the variety and simplicity of ordering their drinks online and sitting on the patio with small groups of friends? All things we have to start to understand and anticipate. New behavioral, safer research methods are critical to this. We must embrace new ways of doing things. Obviously, we can't go on premise or in store to do research and talk to people the way we used to, but we have technology at our fingertips here. And just like we can't imagine being socially distant and locked down at home without technology for our whole family, we have to think the same way about our business and about market research. So for example, virtual shopping techniques, we've tested them. We're finding great application. We're finding extremely close significance in the correlation between consumer behavior in simulated shelves or simulated e-commerce environments and the real thing. You see the numbers here of 92% and 89%. We must embrace these techniques, not just out of necessity, but also as a way to test more and understand all this experimentation. So as we think about what will stick, we should think back to what Simon talked about and the continuum of sentiment as countries and societies go through this curve. As we move from worrying about and uncertainty about the virus to preparing and getting used to it, to soon hopefully getting ready to come back to a new normal where we can go outside and play and be hopeful, but also to whatever those new shopping environments are. And so if you think about the shopping continuum of moving from hoarding, quite frankly, which at least in my world, we're starting to come out of, to experimenting and adjusting to the new e-commerce behaviors that we love. So not just that we have to do, but that we love, and making those shifts for the long term, to anticipating the new world, managing down our inventory and operating in some very, very new and different ways that I wish I could predict, but it's really not possible. So I want to wrap up with just one very simple question. And I ask myself this every single day is, are we ready? Are we ready for what changes are going to stick? Are we ready for new research techniques to understand and yes, start to predict them? And are we ready to get ahead of the curve and plan for that retail normal? So I thank you for your time.
Sorry. Thanks, Alison. That was great. And I think many of us have recognized ourselves in trying to figure out how to move around this new retail world and our options. And things are not obvious. And I remember yesterday I was talking with a colleague from Paris, and she was saying, when this is over, I will never buy online again. I'm going to go to my neighborhood shops because we need to support neighborhood. So yeah, I don't know, there may be some challenges in understanding what is going to stick. What do we need to do, Alison, to start understanding what is going to stick and what is not going to stick?
Well, first, just to your comment about shopping for fun and retailtainment, as we like to call it, is that will be very different in the future, and we can support our local shops in ways that are still safe and can keep them in business too. The second, in terms of your specific answer of what will stick, the first, we need to start with experimenting and testing around safety and value, and how do we really communicate and connect with shoppers who care about those two things. The second, if you're not already truly omni-channel in everything you do, get there now. Stop separating brick and mortar and e-commerce. They're one unique ecosystem and they have to come together. And then the third is learn from the countries that are ahead of us. There are many places, you know, we talked about China and Catherine referenced that are ahead of the curve. What's working there? What can we learn? And as this terrible disease spreads around the world, let's look at places that are moving out of it and what they're doing and what's successful. And let's learn from that, because there's an awful lot of global reapplication.
Great. Thanks a lot, Alison. And thank you for joining us so very early in the morning from your home in the US. And thank you to all of you who have been with us today. And we would love to see you again at our next webinar that will be held on May the 7th. Thank you very much, and bye-bye, everyone.